Hi, welcome to the Community Leader Podcast in Salina, Kansas, episode 14. I'm your host, Todd Welsh, and today we have the Executive Director of the Salina Airport Authority, Tim Rogers, and we have an amazing interview with him. He's going to talk about the transformation of the Schilling Air Force Base when the city of Salina took it over, talk about Tony's Pizza and how they arrived and other industry leaders that are out at the Airport Authority, talk a little bit about how Tim Rogers made it to Salina and some of the impact he's making as a community leader in Salina. Let's check in with a great interview with Tim Rogers. All right, we're here today with the Community Leader Podcast, and my special guest today is Tim Rogers, the Executive Director of Salina Airport Authority. Did I say that right?
You did. Thank
Perfect.
you. Well done.
Yeah. So we've been chatting before we get online here, and you were saying so many great things. I'm like, okay, we got to stop talking because I want to get that all on tape. So before we get into the Salina Airport, what's going on, a little bit about yourself, how you arrived here. So in a minute, 2 minutes, tell us a little about yourself, where you're at today, and how you got to Salina.
Well, many individuals here in Salina don't realize that I was born in Salina, Kansas, 1954. So it was a while, St. John's Hospital, and my mother and father lived here for a number of years. And but until my father was transferred to a position with an insurance company down in Hutchinson as the district manager, then we moved to Hutchinson, Kansas when I was age 6 or 7. So I grew up in Hutchinson, Kansas. I'm a Hutch High Salt Hawk, and then went from Hutch High up to the University of Kansas. And others also don't realize many times that I spent 1 year in law school at Washburn University. That's when I realized I was going to be a very, very hungry and poor attorney when I compared to the group in my class. And that's what led me to aviation management, airport management, aviation. I'd learned how to fly in Hutchinson, Kansas, Wells Aircraft. I'd always had a passion for aviation. KU was a degree in business administration. So how do you combine the two? And that airport management became airport and airport industrial center operations management became a pathway for me.
Nice. Tell me about family here in Salina.
Marina and I have been married since 1980 and met in high school so high school sweethearts. Wow. And our oldest son, John, is 35, and our daughter, Megan, is 33.
And do they live in Salina or elsewhere?
John lives in Overland Park, and Maggie is at home with us. We care for our daughter, Meg. She has some health issues, and we care for her at home here in Salina.
Nice. Well, I must say that I ask these questions only because it's kind of become redundant when I'm talking to people here. It's like, I know you in the community. Mm-hmm. I see everything that you do, but I don't really know you.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's like, I didn't know how many children you had. I didn't know your spouse's name. Mm-hmm. And so that's really why I want to do these, is not only for me. So when I see you out, I feel more connected with you in the community because I do see you at,
we see each other often.
Quite a bit.
City commission meetings, county commission meetings, at Mocha's with picking up coffee and things like that. Yes.
And I want you to know I respect you. Like, I know what you're doing in this community.
Thank you. It's very kind.
And as I was reading your bio today, I Googled you. It's so impressive.
Pretty scary looking at that.
You're the only guy who I've ever brought this to, because I'm like, there's so much that you've been awarded for and everything you've done in aviation. I was writing it all down. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to ask him about it. You know what I mean? So I have a little bit of notes in here if I have to go there, but your resume is impressive. Yeah. Well, the aviation and everything you've done is amazing.
I've been very fortunate, and it first starts with, a support of family and friends. That I came back to Salina, Kansas because my predecessor, retired Air Force Colonel Mike Scanlon, who is my predecessor, was retiring and was asked by friends, college roommate, hey, are you interested in the position here with the Salina Airport Authority? And one of my first flights as a student pilot was into the Salina Regional Airport.
Right.
I was number 3 to land behind a 747 TWA, a Northwest Orient 727, and a TWA L1011. Those aircraft that I don't think any of them are flying much anymore. And I got started here in becoming familiar with the airport due to being a student pilot, flying in and out. But I've always admired the work that Salina as a community has done to reuse a former Schilling Air Force Base, a closed Air Force Base. We are still seen as an example of how to reuse a former military installation. When you look at the facility today, over 120 businesses and organizations are at the airport industrial center. Those businesses and organizations account for over 7,000 jobs, which is 18% of the total employment for Saline County. The economic impact is $1.8 billion for our local economy. And all the activity out there, it's just from Schwann's Food Company to the smallest, newest tenant, they're all growing and thriving. And that's the success story that people look to Salina to try to emulate. And we still get calls and visits from other communities said, how does Salina do this? My response is, in part of, I've had the great fortune of having a great board of directors. I've always had 5 of the leading business individuals in this community, men and women that are appointed by the city commission to really set the goals, the objectives, and set the bar high for me and staff and others to meet and exceed. Great partnerships within the community, the city of Salina, Saline County, our educational institutions, Salina Area Chamber of Commerce, but Kansas State University, Salina, Kansas Wesleyan University, the Salina Community Economic Development Organization, and others. It's the partnerships that is unique to Salina. I think you've heard some of your other guests on your program maybe talk about the partnerships and how important they've been. Salina is, again, unique. Individuals will call, and I've had board members from other airport authorities across the country calls, again, how does Salina do this?
Right.
How do you develop the partnerships? And I think it's the relationship building that we do, but it's a priority. So tell one story about about being hired back in 1984 for the position.
Okay.
I started in January of 1985.
But real quick before you say that, where did you so you graduated KU.
Right.
And then where did you go to? So between KU and coming to Salina, where did you go?
I went out to Colorado for my first airport position.
Okay.
I was interested in airport operations. I was also interested in the airline industry, and I'd interviewed with Frontier Airlines and then Continental Airlines. But I had a recommendation to go out and visit with the airport manager at what is now the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport,
okay,
then Jeffco Airport, out by Brimfield, Colorado, on the way to Boulder. And I walked in, and Dave Gordon was the manager at the time, a dear friend to this day, and talked about it. We spent an afternoon talking about airport operations, airport industrial park development. Dave said, well, good to meet you. I said, if you're really interested in the position in this career path, he had a position open on his maintenance crew.
Huh.
Took it in a heartbeat. So when can I start? And so as soon as you can get your stuff, I was in Topeka at the time, went back, got my stuff, drove out there, found
So you're
an
about
apartment.
19 at this age?
Oh, no. And so
okay.
not quite 19.
Oh, no, I guess that wouldn't be, you have to graduate college. I get it. So
yeah.
somewhere in there. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit older than
In
that.
the 20s, though.
In the 20s.
Okay.
And
All
so, but it's the best thing. The K-State Salina has an aviation maintenance program, and the students that come in, and we have 2 great young men, and we've had great young women coming through the program that intern with us. The one thing I advise them, we're going to give you tasks and jobs on the airfield, on the operations side, aircraft rescue firefighting side, airfield maintenance side. And I do that for a reason, because that's how I got started. It's the best start, literally from the ground up, mowing the grass, plowing snow, fixing runway lights, fixing roofs, and doing the work out on the airfield. So I still have a sense of, in each one of my airfield maintenance workers, my operations staff, my firefighters, I understand, have a sense of what they need resource-wise and support to do their job effectively.
Right.
And
because you started that
I
ground
started
level.
there.
Yeah.
Now, they don't let me touch any of the equipment anymore. I can't.
How many employees do you oversee that are out running the airport authority?
We have a staff of 16.
16. Okay.
Right. And it's a small, efficient staff. So
Yeah, you guys do a lot of work. 16 people to maintain all of that property is amazing.
The airport authority property is 2,900 acres of airport and another 400 acres of airport industrial center.
Yeah, and tell me how many square feet you make, because it was like 550,000 square feet of buildings. Is that correct?
Actually, it's about 1.6 million. So,
Okay.
And
I was close, half.
And you would appreciate the fact that the occupancy rate, we're close to 88% occupied. So our vacancy rate it's a sign of the economic health of the community. We don't have enough space for the demand that is there for manufacturing space, light manufacturing, office space, warehouse space, and we are talking to a locally based company that's interested in doing some warehouse development. And not really spec, but build, and it'll get leased.
Now, they did just build a big warehouse development somewhere out there by FedEx, though, didn't they? Whose building is that?
That is the Superior Group that is doing that.
Oh, so they built another building.
Well, they are getting ready to. They have the City Commission authorization to do that project,
Okay.
But they're still finalizing their leases with their launch customers on that. But this is then beyond that space.
Wow.
We still need additional warehouse and light manufacturing space. So that is the additional growth that the Airport Industrial Center will see will be along those lines. And we have 9 acres and 17 acres available right now that are being looked at for that development.
Yeah. See, and that's what I think is amazing about you, that my respect is huge, is I just think of you as like airport. Like when I first met you, I thought, okay, he hangs out in the tower, like he just runs the airport.
Well, you know what I do, and then you found out what I do.
And then, exactly. I did. And I was like, man, but to manage all of that, I mean, that's a huge facility out there, and it's every time I go out there, it's well manicured, it's taken care of. It just feels like you're in control. Like to have that much space for you to manage in that is like, I think it just looks great every time I go out there.
Appreciate that. And that's something that we strive for every day. And we have great tenants that when we do lease space, and then we do work with the tenants. And as you know, that communication and a clear expectation to a tenant as a landlord, this is how we would like the space we're going to give it to you in great shape, and we'd like for you to do your part to maintain it in good condition. But that, and the city of Salina does a great job with the streets and the utilities. It's the partnerships, the relationship building that we do want. We have this discussion at staff meeting quite often, and it comes from me. Let's make sure that today that the person that is new to Salina or looking at Salina as or the Airport Industrial Center as maybe a location, if they come in and they see it for the first time as best as we can, let's always expect we're always selling the space and showing the space. It's going to be, I want many of our vacant buildings to be always show ready. Yeah. So we just don't clean it up right before. We always do inspect right before we show. But too, from the real estate business and your experience, that it has to be show ready. Yeah. Or otherwise you're starting behind the curve or behind the power curve.
So we're going to circle back because you were going to talk about you coming from Broomfield, out having that deal, and then coming to Salina. But we do have something in common. That was your first start, was the Salina Airport. Mm-hmm. That was my first start. You don't even know this. I'm going to tell you a little story.
Okay. I mean, you got my attention.
Yeah. So I moved here in 1989, and my very first job was out of the Salina Airport, but at the Hertz Rent-A-Car.
Okay.
So Chuck Stein,
absolutely.
I used to rent cars for when I was 18 years old. Yeah. I would go, and when the flight would come
Chuck
in.
Chuck lives around the corner. Yeah. We see each other all the time.
The plane would come in. I had a pager. I mean, I thought I was, 18, 19. You're either a drug dealer or you rent cars in Salina if you have a pager when you're 18. Because that's clear back in like 1989, 90, 91, somewhere in there. But it was funny because I used to tell the story. I feel like I'm getting off on a tangent, but this is a funny story. Before people know the airport as it is today, there literally used to be one gal who I would watch, and she would get in a little Datsun truck, and she would drive. She would check all the people in.
Yep.
And then she would tag all the stuff. This is before security.
Oh, yeah.
She would throw all the bags in the back of this old little bitty Datsun truck. And she would run that out there, All the luggage would be in there, and then she would get the cones out. She would bring the plane in.
That's right.
She would load everything. She would run the little thing out to get the people out. She would unload the bags, load the bags, then drive them in there. The whole time, everybody is waiting for her
Right.
to bring. And I tell that story, and nobody believes it. Like, she did everything.
Yes. I mean, it was probably the days of Air Midwest and, 19-seat turboprop. And, one person at the counter, and then they see him at the air stairs at the airplane. Then they see him at baggage claim. Yeah, that was. It's far different today.
Different
with
today.
regional jet service, United Express service. It is far different today.
Yeah. So that was my start. So let's go back to you. And so you're leaving Jeffco Airport, or you'd been there, and then how do you hear about Salina?
Well, actually, from Jeffco, I went went up to Greeley, Colorado, become the airport manager at Greeley. So started on the maintenance crew at Jeffco. Then I was brought in as assistant airport manager. Spent a year out on the maintenance, out on the airfield, maintenance, aircraft rescue, firefighting, the whole airfield ops side of it. Then I was brought in as the assistant airport manager at Jeffco for Dave's assistant. Then I was recruited to go up to Greeley, Colorado, to become the airport manager in Greeley, Colorado. At Jeffco, we the airport and the adjacent airport industrial center was just really starting, and that's what really got me thinking that the aviation side is exciting, and it's just we always say kind of in aviation, it kind of sometimes you just need that smell of Jet A in the morning. I mean, and
Right.
It's just kind of and it gets into your blood, and being around airplanes and aviation, aviators, and the businesses. But the industrial center side was just taking off at Jeffco. It was the very beginnings of what people driving in Broomfield and up the corridor up from Broomfield to Boulder see now all that industrial development that started being planned.
Which is now called what, Interlaken?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm from Colorado. So
Okay.
I lived in Broomfield. So I'm originally from
Okay.
North Glen, Colorado.
Okay,
Then I
yeah.
lived in Arvada, Broomfield.
Yeah.
And so that drive, when you say you were going to Boulder, there was nothing
out
between
there.
Broomfield and Boulder.
Right.
You could have shut your eyes and not missed anything. And then I went back there 10 years ago for my class reunion, and Interlaken was born.
Yeah, that was a plan on paper when I was still that long ago, and
Okay.
in that late 80s, in the early 80s.
Okay.
Storage Tech was
Right.
just Jesse Alweda. That was just his idea.
Now, what's funny is my parents, I just told you about me interviewing my
Yeah.
parents. Part of their story was my dad worked at Storage Tech.
Really?
He was a machinist at Storage Tech for a long time,
Yeah.
and that's how we moved from Arkansas to Colorado, was going to work at Storage Tech. So
Yeah.
it's just a small world.
Oh, it is. These degrees of separation are
Exactly.
very real. So, okay, the story about Storage Tech, they're really going, and they built a corporate hangar, and they bought their first corporate jet, and they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, here's the company, and they needed the jet to grow the business.
Right.
But it was a Hawker 800, and just a beautiful jet. But I mean, and this is at times when just anybody want to go down to Denver and get a hamburger? Sure. So you
Jump in the jet.
and go down the old Stapleton Airport just to get a
Yeah.
hamburger.
Yep.
It doesn't quite happen like that anymore, but those are the early days. And so that got me interested in the airport industrials, what an airport can do to support business and industry growth in a business park or industrial park. Went up to Greeley to manage up there, and I needed an airport manager's position, that experience. And there, it was just the very beginnings. Greeley didn't even have water and sewer out to the airport. And that was the initial battle there, is to convince the city and the county to actually agree to extend water and sewer services out to the airport and get off of septic systems. So, and that was a struggle. It's doing very well now, but I took some hard lumps starting out there,
Right.
and being a part of that starting. But then when the call came about my interest in Salina, it was like, yes. And it took just one visit, August of '84. In fact, it
Wow.
was my first visit here after I learned about it. Our Marina and I, our parents were still living in Hutchinson. Didn't
So it's
have children yet.
perfect fit.
It was a perfect.
You knew the airport. You'd been.
I knew the airport, learned more about it right away, and realized this is. And I have a board member who has explained, has described the airport industrial center as a diamond in the rough. I'd like to think that today he sees that diamond's a little more polished, and still work to do. But it's a little more. It's got a little more brightness to it.
Right.
And I think we are there. I think we're at the point where the next 10 years are just going to be just an outstanding growth, both on the aviation side and the airport industrial center side. We're starting planning for the west side development of the airfield west, and that just starting a planning project for the Salina Airport west side development. So that's coming. We have a plan for developing and constructing up to 600,000 square feet of new maintenance, repair, and overhaul MRO hangar space on the north part of the airport. There's a lot that's going to be happening in the coming years.
So let's spend about 5 minutes on this topic, because I'm the longer I'm here, so I've been here maybe 33, 34 years now. Like I'm starting to get interested in how it was in the 50s and how the downtown was, and mostly now the airport. A lot of people don't know this, and when I give community tours, that the old golf course, the municipal golf course, was our airport until the Schilling Air Force Base closed down and they gave us the airport. And you're going to tell me a little bit of what you know about that in a second. But the funny part of it is so the Pro Shop was our old terminal, and Markley Road
was a taxiway.
And then the runway is where all of the
parking is now.
The parking and the ball fields, and that's why everything's slanted. And when you tell people that, once you drive down it, you start to see that was an old airport.
My first airplane ride was at Salina and a Central Airlines DC-3 with my father. My father, when he was living here, traveled a lot and still did when we were at Hutchinson. But our first home was on Pershing, and so I still know that home. That's where they brought me from the hospital to the house on Pershing, and then Mom and Dad built a house on Hilldale. And about 104 Hilldale. I think I walk by it and I ride by it all the time. Yeah. So, but there was nothing that behind that was just pasture and cropland out to the east. But I knew the flight schedule. I'm age 6. I knew the flight schedule, had it in my head, could hear the old DC-3 making their approach to Salina. And we had a big picture window. I could see the DC-3 making the final approach into the runway at the Salina Municipal Airport, which is now Crawford. Right. That's when then I'd tell Mom it's time for us to go, and we'd hop in the vehicle and we run out and pick up Dad. But that was my first airplane ride, was in a DC-3. Wow. And again, whenever I go into the Pro Shop at the Muni, I can still see those images of the DC-3s on that parking lot out on the Muni. Used to be the apron area where the DC-3s would park. Yeah. And then so let's now go to when Schilling Air Force Base, was that in 54, 55? I can't remember the exact year. Well, the kind of the sequence is the Smoky Hill Army Air Corps Base was built in 1942. See, this was the site surveys. I've gone through, for another reason, a lot of base history, a lot of documents, but it's been good to do that. But I came across the initial site survey for Army airfields that was being done in 1938, 1939, in preparation for potential going to war, and so the site survey, it reads like by the War Department, it reads just like a corporation looking for sites for a new facility. So what are they looking at? They look at water. They look at population, education, schools, roads, streets. I mean, all these issues. When we see a request or a proposal, a request for a submittal from an industry or Kansas Department of Commerce, well, the War Department's looking for the same type of
Right.
capabilities, available land, and so quickly it came up that that the site at Salina, Kansas would be ideal, ranked high, and then the War Department purchased the property and built Smoky Hill just literally overnight. The stories about how fast, but the airfield was built. So the airport, Smoky Hill, was a training base initially for B-17 crews and then for B-29 crews. So those crews trained at Salina, housed at Salina, and they deployed overseas, either to Europe or the Pacific. B-29s all went to the Pacific. For a short period of time, the base was deactivated after World War II. The Cold War came on us, and then the base was reactivated as an Air Force base by that time. Then ultimately, upgraded to a Strategic Air Command base, and that's when a huge investment went into the facility. Not just temporary buildings, but mortar and block buildings, hangars that were built. We are rehabilitating a 1944 hangar right now. We'll get that back in service.
Would that be the old Sharp? Is that where Sharp Performance was?
That is. That's right.
That makes sense because I went there and everything was stripped off of it.
Yeah,
all
it looks
10, so I didn't know what was going on. But,
yeah,
okay.
and so it'll be, and we had about 8 years ago, we had the Airport Authority. We had done the sister hangar to the west, and so these we're retaining. We want to retain those buildings, and many of the other buildings built in the 50s and 60s were so well constructed that it's easy to go and rehabilitate them, and we have done that with a number of the buildings. So this was a highly ranked and highly regarded Strategic Air Command base, and now we're in 1964. The Vietnam War is really, and our involvement as a country is increasing, and the Department of Defense at that time needed to make some cuts so they can actually fund put resources to Southeast Asia. At that time, is very much a Democratic administration. At that time, we're talking about the Johnson administration in Kansas. Probably no surprise, was very Republican at the time. There was no formal process as far as public comment or consideration by Congress. No committees. Department of Defense said we're going to close down these bases and these locations. They all happen to be Republican states, and it was a shock to community leaders. The Air Force ranked, in Strategic Air Command and those that were operating the base. This was a highly decorated facility, but it was closed. The closing announcement came in November of 1964, and the base was closed in 1965.
Wow.
No long-term transition. It was closed, and there was some kind of a slowly shut down of facilities, disposing of facilities, but the final unit that was actually assigned here was out of here early 1967. So, but that's what the Airport Authority was created for, and the community came together, city, county, chamber at the time, to develop a reuse plan, and the Airport Authority was created out of that reuse plan.
Okay, so when was the Airport Authority created? Do you remember what year?
1965.
Okay, 1965. So help me understand. Let's see, what question would I have? Did the federal government just give us all of the land? So how many acres did they give us?
Well, here's how this process worked. The Airport Authority was created by special legislation was adopted, and an enabling statute was adopted by the Kansas legislature in that 1965 session. So this is January through generally March. And our legislature still operates along that 90-day cycle. City Commission then used that enabling statute to create the Airport Authority. The Airport Authority was, I think, our first Airport Authority board meeting was like July of 1965. So very quick, but the Airport Authority is working with others on a reuse plan, and that was again a collaborative effort in this community. As we talked before, the partnerships, the collaborations, how we get great tasks done as a community. That plan was set upon okay, we'll take the airfield and transition that would become a regional airport. So that was a big part of it, of the surplus property package. Then there was property then that was then carved out of the military of the former Schilling Air Force Base to become what's then was Schilling Institute. And that was involving the Kansas Board of Regents to have a facility, educational facilities there to train new workforce, new workers. The community lost 5,000 airmen and their families overnight.
Yeah.
Just shocking. It stunned the community. Then property was set aside to create a technical college. So he wanted a vocational school, which is now Salina Area Technical College. Mm-hmm. Then property was set aside for human services, where it's now the Occupational Center for Central Kansas. So the reuse plan was intended to create a facility it could truly work in concert so that we could replace jobs and payroll lost due to the closure of Schilling Air Force Base. City of Salina agreed to take over the utility system and be a partner there. There are elements other communities have done, but they've lost. They didn't do the same, duplicate the Salina success,
right,
because they maybe the city said, oh, we don't want to take over the utilities because that air base that they were closed. I'm thinking like Roswell, New Mexico. That's 6 miles away. We are still 3 miles outside of the city of Salina. There was nothing between the base and Salina. That was.
Well, I can even remember I moved here in the 90s. Like if you said you were going to go to Jim Clark Chevrolet, that's how much I remember. Like JJ Chevrolet. People would be like, what are you going clear out there for? I mean, there was no Walmart and Olive Garden and Sam's and Target. I mean, once you left, when I moved here, they were just getting ready to tear down the movie theater, which pretty much the screen sets where you think of Burger King and Spangles.
That's right.
Just back in there a little bit.
That's right.
That's why I remember the screen being, and we see some of the old photos in there. But for the people who are watching or listening to this, it's like that's what I'm starting to think is interesting is how did this town develop and how did that all work? And they got to realize that the airport where it sits today, or even Tony's, was so far outside of town that the future thinkers that we had on the community boards or whatever in 1965, for them to agree to take on the water, the sewer, all the utilities, the roads, from when the Air Force, that was a big part of it. Had they just said, you know what, we don't want anything to do with that, I think it would have been so dilapidated by the time we tried to get out there, we wouldn't be able to resurrect it.
Well, the Kansas example is the former Walker Army Air Corps base out there north of I-70, and it's just at Russell, and it's a ghost town. Harrington, hate to name names, but Harrington, Kansas. It was remote, and the city of Harrington didn't have the means or capability at the time or desire to go ahead and do that. And I can go through others in other states that the effort was not made, and the foresight was not there. So, when I looked at the facility in August of 1984, I'm going, wow, look at this opportunity here. I mean, and I think, it definitely a diamond in the rough, but boy, it's shining and it's going, we got more work to do.
So was the terminal built by then? The terminal that we know of today, what year was that built?
Well, that's again getting back to the quality of the facilities constructed. That was for the Schilling Air Force Base. That was base operations, and so that building was expanded in the early '80s. The Hertz area was expanded in the early '80s. So that south baggage claim area and where the rental cars are located still. Right. That was done back then, and so and then we have the airport authority since then. We've the walkway, you may remember, was just some glass and a lot of leaking roofs and things. Yeah. Now the airport authority, we've spent $1 million to upgrade that, heating, cooling, restrooms, and now it's a concourse. And I like to say Concourse A, Gate 1.
Right.
Denver had to start someplace,
right.
I mean, and so, but we've been able to take care of that building we are positioned to hopefully be successful with the grant application to receive federal assistance to expand the terminal building, to add more room for the TSA screening checkpoint, add more room for baggage, ticketing, ticket counters, lobby space, and a new arrival departure building out on the west end of the concourse. So I've just been fortunate that my predecessor, Mike Scanlon, who just had the frame of mind, and the board of directors, well, these are good buildings, these are good structures, and we can repurpose them, and we can never sometimes build the basic bones of the building any better than they are now. But in some buildings, we've had to go ahead and abandon and demo. But for the most part, we try to use what we have in a manner that we can then build off of it.
So under your watch, when did Tony's Pizza come to the Airport Authority? When was that building built?
So the Tony's story is always, and the Schwann story is always of great interest. So the base closure occurred, and the Airport Authority has available space for, and I think many of our businesses here at the Airport Industrial Center got their start because there's a space available for those individuals that had good ideas. Vortex started in an Airport Authority building, and they've launched out of that. But the Barlows and the Logans had an idea about doing frozen pizza, and this was, we had Tony's Italian restaurant downtown,
right.
And so the Tony's Pizza is named after the Tony's Pizza and that operation here. I'm not going to get all the story correct and trying to condense this, but it is
the old Tony's Pizza, not to interrupt you, but I've read it's kind of across from the new hotel. Did you remember that location? Is that where the Tony's Pizza was, like across from First Bank?
Oh, absolutely.
I can't remember what's in there now. Is that the museum? Would that be the building, or was
it's
it close by
it's where the art center is?
The art center. Okay.
Yeah, you can see the arches of the old restaurant.
Okay. So the old restaurant used to be in the art center.
That's right.
And that's where Tony's
Pretty
Pizza,
close to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
one of those buildings.
Right in that area. So someone will probably correct both of us.
Right, exactly.
But anyway.
Which that means people are watching.
That's
like
right.
If somebody comes up and says, you're wrong,
You're wrong.
I'm going to be great. I'm great with that. That means you're
good.
watching.
But there was this idea about doing frozen pizza. And the Airport Authority had two buildings available, buildings 260, 270, that were they're almost inside the current Tony's East. We got two concepts here: Tony's East and Tony's West. Tony's East is the existing facility.
Right.
There was this idea, and by gosh, it worked. I mean, they came up with a way to do the crust and the ingredients, and then put together and freeze it and distribute it, and it started working. Then, about 1972, comes the Schwann's company. Schwann's, and I've been up to the Schwann's home office up in Marshall, Minnesota, and they have a museum up there. And in this area, in their welcoming area, there is the original ad placed in the Wall Street Journal: wanted one frozen pizza plant. It's that simple.
Wow. So let me stop here real quick, because now this is very interesting to me. I want to get this straight, because I have not heard this story before.
Yeah.
I have heard about Tony's, and then I've heard about Al Schwann,
right,
who lived here in Salina as well.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned a name, Barlow and somebody else.
Logans. Barlows and Logans.
Barlows and Logans, they're the ones who franchised Tony's?
No, they had the idea for Tony's Pizza to do frozen pizza and distribute that and sell that.
And did they buy the sauce and everything from? How does Tony's come into that?
Here's the rest.
Am I getting ahead of myself?
You are.
Okay.
So the ad runs. The Barlows, Logans answer the ad. We have a facility, and they've developed this to the point. And Dick Barlow was a great business mind, and the Logans, he was a airspace engineer, and so great too.
Both living here in Salina.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very, and they went on later on to do Rima Bakeware.
Okay.
So after this,
okay.
And so the ad is answered, and so Al Schwan is sent down. Their father, Marvin, is still there, and Marvin is the brother who was up in Marshall, and Paul, their father, is still living. But okay, it's decided Al's going to come down and check out this place, and they make the deal to acquire Tony's Pizza, and so the Schwan's Food Company. At that point, Schwan's was still very much into the home delivery service, and they started out doing ice cream. The ice cream plant still in Marshall. Then they got into the other food products, and living in Minnesota and Wisconsin and those areas, I mean, that was a staple for the Schwan's man to come.
Right.
And still in Salina, Kansas, when they came down to Salina, I mean, we had the Schwan's man drop by and just go into the garage, open up the freezer, and just whatever
Right.
the order was, drop it in there and leave.
Yep.
I mean, it was Amazon before Amazon, maybe. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then it was decided, okay, Al's going to move to Salina. So Al and Doris, his wife, and his wife Doris moved to Salina to start developing this plant. At this point, the Tony's Pizza is an Airport Authority tenant. So Schwan's comes in, the family company, and they assume the lease from the Barlows and Logans for this building 260, 270, and then the expansion starts. The Airport Authority was just able to use our bonding capability. The Airport Authority can issue leasehold revenue bonds, and we did that pretty much with local banks, and started building this facility.
So it didn't look like it did today. It's been many. I mean, how big do you think the building was when the Barlows and them started? What was the existing east building?
Well, that was probably no more than 10, 12,000 feet to start with.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did they bulldoze that and build what's there? Or did
No,
they build
actually, they
around
started
it?
building around it.
Okay.
And at one time, I was probably able to go and identify maybe 2 walls of the original building still
Right.
standing. But there've been so many modifications since then, but for a long time. But Al was the guiding force as far as the development of the plant here. And it grew to be, even before the most recent expansion, it grew to be the largest frozen pizza manufacturing plant in the world. And it was through the leadership of Al, his brother Marvin, as they grew the company here in this product line. And that we did arrive at a point where we realized that having this multi-million-dollar facility and business, and it's gone national as being on leased property, probably not the thing to do. So the Airport Authority, and actually it was many times I'd go into Al's office, and another name that is a historic name in my mind for the development of Salina's local attorney Frank Norton.
Oh yeah. And
but I remember clearly the day I'd go over to Al and said, "Can you come on over?" And this is after I started the job. The executive it came in as executive director, and be Al, me, and Frank. And so what's next? And it's usually the next expansion or something like that. But then Frank said, we probably need to get this all into ownership by the company. So we had some outstanding bonds that we needed to figure out how we get those paid off, defease those, get those set up, and then get the land underlying the plant into ownership by Schwan's. So one of those points in time is the right time to do it, and it stayed in that ownership for a number of years. Still some additional expansion, but then it was just ready for CJ Group to come in, the Seoul South Korea company that acquired Schwan's. They wouldn't want it to be part of a lease with the Airport Authority, and so when it came time for the company to be acquired by an outside entity, in this case, one of the best partners this community could have would be with CJ Group. It was all set and ready to go. Then now the next phase of expansion is underway because the capital resources that CJ Group has, and their determination to be the world's leader in frozen food and bringing those products, Asian, pizza, desserts, to
So
customers.
now you're talking about the West, what you call Tony's West.
That's Tony's West now.
And so we have to think about this when you and I are talking, is that people are going to be watching this hopefully 10 years from today. And so that's what I'm trying to document, is so that this history is there. And so what arose for me when we were talking about Schwann's and the delivery service, like, we know exactly what we're talking about. But like my grandkids right now who would watch this, I want them to know that there used to be these little gold trucks that would drive around Salina.
Yes.
And the guys would pull up to your house, and it was basically a big deep freeze on the back of
It was a big, yeah.
F-350.
That's right.
And they would knock on your door, and they would hand you a brochure, and then you would order stuff. And 90% of the people would order way too much stuff. At least my family did. You know what I mean? Like, we had to buy another refrigerator and another freezer to store all of the frozen chicken breasts and the popsicles and the drum. I mean, they sold everything.
Everything.
And so it was fun until they said, okay, well, you owe me $162. And I'd be like, well, that was fast, you know? And then he would go get it in the truck, and he would bring everything to your front door that was in the truck.
Or or many cases, just
Put it right in your fridge. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just...
he'd go right in your garage and put it in your freezer.
Or right into the kitchen and stock the freezer.
So I only say that because that's normal for you and I.
Yeah.
Because we lived that era. But, 10 years down the road, I don't even know what 10 years is going to look like. But they go, can you believe? It's kind of like when I lived in Northglenn, Colorado, we used to have a called Carl's Dairy.
Yes.
And we used to have a milk box on our front door. And the guy would come in every Tuesday morning and leave 2 glass bottles of milk, 1 orange juice and 1 chocolate milk.
That's right.
And throw some ice in there.
Yep.
And we'd come home from school, and we'd have to get the milk. That was our chore, was to get the milk. Most people had to go milk the cows. Me and my brother would complain that we literally had to go get the milk out of the box and put it in the fridge. You know, like that was a chore that we got paid allowance to do. But anyway, I wanted to share that because in 10 years from now, nobody's even going to know what a Schwann's truck is.
Right.
And you and I are talking about it like they just roam in the street right now. And they shut down. They left Salina in just last year. Was that right? 2 years ago?
Well, actually 2 years ago, they shut down the home distribution system in the last almost 3 years. So, yeah. And, but... Yeah, and that was because, the economy changes and business practices change, and it's a pretty expensive way to deliver food to a house. Now it comes in a box and maybe some cold packs in it, but you can order the same items that Schwann's was bringing to your home in a truck and a route driver that now it just shows up in an Amazon Prime box.
Yeah. Okay, so I value your time. I could talk to you all day, just so you know that. There's 2 things I want to get on tape before we end. And so one would be the Global Flyer and your experience with that and the faucets and everything that happened there. Mm-hmm. And then the next would be what's the future of the Salina Airport in aircraft and the flight to Houston and how everything's going to work with Chicago and Denver and how that all gets worked.
Sure.
Unfortunately, that could take another hour. So let's condense that to value your time and ours and the listeners.
We can always come back and talk about things like that again.
I really would. It's like part 2 because...
It's not like we have to end it here because, again, I think in a lot of these projects, I mean, something will develop and I have 4 other projects I'd like to talk about. We've got a new workforce training initiative that we've started. And coming up in this next 2 weeks, a new project is going to be announced about a new advanced simulation center. It's going to be on the campus of K-State Salina.
So let's do this. I want to invite you back to talk about the aviation, everything that's going to come up, because what I really want to document is the amazing thing that happened with the Global Flyer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you were hands-on. You were the guy who instrumental in getting that all done. And so I imagine you could talk for another 20, 30 minutes at least about everything that happened with that. If you have some insight stories, remember, these are people 10 years now going to watch this.
Right.
And I want them to know about the Global Flyer. So I know I watched it. I missed it coming in, but I watched it take off.
Yep.
But I missed it coming in when it arrived. But tell us how that all started. First, I won't do it justice. So you tell us what I'm even talking about on how that the thought came about with Steve. Give me his last name.
Steve Fawcett.
Steve Fawcett. How did that all come about?
It started with a phone call from a network planner with Virgin Atlantic Airlines, Kevin Stass. He's in the UK, at the office, and also, the phone, the intercom rings. Well, there's a call from Kevin Stass with Virgin Atlantic. Would you want to take the call? Said, sure. You always accept the call from somebody who's calling about, I'll talk to anybody about a project, and especially calling from an airline. Okay. Many times I'm thinking Kevin's calling because they need to ferry, maybe a jet through, they need to land, or they need to come in and do some flight training, or there's a number of reasons why. So I'll pick up the call. Kevin introduced himself, and he says, I'm calling on behalf of Steve Fawcett and Sir Richard Branson. I said, okay. He said, we've got a project, and we're looking for a site for the Global Flyer. The Global Flyer had been in the new aviation news media. The concept of the Global Flyer is actually it was being built by Burt Rutan and Scale Composites out of Mojave. So the idea was out there, and in aviation, I think we generally in the industry we knew Steve by name and by his achievements already, and in gliding and ballooning. And he had done many of these projects with Sir Richard Branson. So now I'm interested. So how can I help? What do you need? So many people assume that the location was going to be for the Global Flyer to be as a home base. The location was going to be either the West Coast or East Coast. Kevin explained very quickly, we're looking for a location at the center of the United States to work off of. We want Steve to be over land for the first few hours of departure in case a mishap occurs or he needs to abort and land. We also want him to be over land for the last few hours of the flight. They generally they thought 70 hours was going to be the general, 70, 75 is what was going to take that to fly solo around the world nonstop and be the first man to do that. What we explained to people about the Fawcett Plaza that's out there now that commemorates the achievement, that is a monument to an absolute aviation milestone that is just on par with the first manned flight by the Wright brothers. It's on par with the first transatlantic flight by Lindbergh. It's the first time anybody has done that, and it can be duplicated. The record can be beaten by time, but no one will be the first man, first pilot to fly solo around the world nonstop. So, Steve, there's some information was asked for. Kevin asked for some information. Of course, what was very attractive was the airport's runway, the primary runway's length, and do we have a hangar facility that can accommodate, an aircraft that has like a 120-foot wide, wingspan, and we went down the list. Yes. And so I said, okay, I'll be back in touch. What they were really looking at, where I know the airports, and I could see them in my mind, up and along down almost I-135 and I-35, that are former military bases that have long runways. And Kevin called back and said, Steve would like to come in and visit. And so Steve himself flew in. That's what impressed me.
Right.
He flew in. He had a business jet, and he flew in, and he just said, "I'd just like to hop in the vehicle. Let's go take a look." And we just drove around and looked at hangar, runway, facilities. We drove by K-State Salina. He said, "Well, tell me more about K-State Salina and the professional flight program and the aviation program." And that became just almost like, I'm going to say the facilities sold themselves, but the community's capability to have an aviation program and students right next door. And that was a passion that Steve had, was to involve youth. Many of us, he's quoted saying along these lines, that many of his adventures and many of his record attempts and gliders and balloons and sailing were intended to inspire youth, and especially in aviation, to set goals and achieve those goals. And so that really, once that visit occurred, then the project started falling into place. And then we started getting the key people that are going to be involved with the project, the team support, the folks from Scale Composites, and that started to accelerate. It didn't take long for that project to take shape. We didn't announce anything at that time because this was all low key, and really wasn't just really prior to his arrival for the first time on a flight, bringing the global flyer from Mojave to Salina for the first time. We were the first cross-country flight from Mojave to Salina, and that was still a test flight. And
I don't remember, was that in the news that it was coming in, or
No.
did you guys keep that just kind of quiet? Just
It
flew
was
in
pretty
and then it was
quiet.
here. Yeah,
Very
I don't
quiet.
remember that.
There was some media coverage as it arrived, but no, this was, and this was the experience with Global Virgin Atlantic and the Virgin Group, and that is still to this day they're one of the experts as far as media and putting on an event. I mean, and again, this resulted in the flight, the around the world flight solo, and 67 hours, and this was still people tell me still very few events have received the international media coverage. I mean, literally on par with the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
As far as the coverage that we received. People today still associate Salina with the global flyer. So it continues to pay dividends for us as an airport industrial center, K-State Salina, the aviation program, and the community still held in high regard from being able to host and be the home base of the global flyer.
Yeah. So let's go behind the scenes of that. Is there anything you remember? Did it almost not happen? Is there anything that when they brought it here, like did certain things like from the command center? Like I'm going behind the scenes now. Is there anything like they had to take off at a particular time? The weather had to be, did it, because I can't remember now. How long ago, when did that happen? Do you remember? What year?
Yeah, 2005.
Okay, so 2005.
I believe I have it right.
Okay.
So,
And were they supposed to take off one day and then they didn't? And did everything have to work out correctly? I'm trying to remember. There seemed like there was something about the day.
weather was critical. Weather was absolutely critical to the flight. It's also the flight had to be from west to east. So the jet stream flows from the west to the east. So the weather at altitude at 40,000 feet and the jet stream, where was the jet stream? In March, as we get this is our timing where we get a lot of severe weather, of course. We have in the past, always will. It's because the jet stream drops down and brings down unstable air. It had to be, the jet stream was key, providing the tailwind. Even though the airplane's flying at 450 miles an hour, cruising, the tailwind was essential to make the flight. So you're burning the least amount of fuel as opposed to flying into the wind when aircraft burns more fuel. So the day, it was always about finding a window that the weather and the meteorologist assigned to the project, who is based in Belgium, in fact, for this and making those predictions. The day of the flight, it was cold as can be. I mean, it was a blistering cold northwest wind, and the daylight was waning, and it was just down to the very, very dusk time, and he was not going to be able to depart at night. That was not going to be within their safety protocols.
Right.
So it got down. All of a sudden, the weather came in. The wind's going to be dying down, like 5 p.m. And it did. And everybody's out there at the end of runway 35, just colder and to be waiting. And finally, it got launched. And
that's what I remember it was this touch and go, like it's not going to happen, then it is going to happen, and we didn't know if we were going to leave, and should we stay? Like it was this big unknown. That's what I remember.
It was, and that was because of the weather and the next window of opportunities, like a space launch almost, because you have these launch windows. Same thing here, and the weather determines, was going to be was the determining factor. The airplane is ready to go. The pilot, Steve Foss, was ready to go. The weather had to be right. And the weather had to be right also forecast along the route of travel around the world. So, I mean, it's a...
predict that. Huh?
Yeah, it wasn't just from here to Chicago type of thing. So there was a inadvertent incident that occurred. Steve always acknowledged that whether it's the sailing, the ballooning, the gliding records, and the attempts, there's always risk. He was in the commodities trader, and so he had a mind that he was always assessing risk, and so there was a switch for oxygen in the cock, and it's not a pressurized cabin. It has an oxygen mask on, and it has to have a flow of oxygen. And usually there's a 100% switch or there's a flow switch. And so, the cockpit is pressurized, but he needed this oxygen also for a standby. So he inadvertently hit the oxygen switch to 100%, and it just was flowing oxygen. He didn't realize it until well into the flight that it should have been on demand, so he's just taking oxygen on demand.
He needs it, yeah.
He did not at that point the pressurization from the engine is providing the oxygen in the system inside the cabin. So he went ahead and continued the flight with having a full supply of oxygen, other than what's called a little bailout bottle on his parachute harness. It's a calculated risk. He decided to go ahead and proceed, and they made that decision before he crossed over the East Coast onto the Atlantic. There was a series of incidents like that occurred, but it was all about that risk decision to go or no go, even during the flight, and that also there was an issue related to the fuel, and decided to go. And they had a small design issue. They fixed for the subsequent two other record-setting flights, but he went ahead and proceeded. After the first flight, the morning after, and everybody had gone, and we were down at the hangar, and I asked Steve, well, did you think you were going to make it? He said, never. He never thought he'd make it on the first attempt, because many of his other attempts for as far as a balloon record or gliding record, it always took more than one attempt.
Right.
But he saw the opportunity to go ahead and complete it and bring the Global Flyer back home and land back at Salina.
How many days did it take him to do that?
It takes 67 hours.
67 hours. Okay. So
right.
he flew around the world in 67 hours.
Right. Plus
and then landed safely back in there again. Did you was there a command center set up there?
And that was the beauty of K-State Salina, and that's where then Dean and CEO of K-State Salina, Dennis Kuhlman, just embraced this project. So what is now the college center at K-State Salina, and the conference room was transferred into. I mean, it was like a transfer to something out of a movie, of a mission control. Literally, the media company that helped manage this, they transformed this conference room into a mission control center with all the consoles that you would see at a moon launch, mission control or NASA. It was the showmanship that Sir Richard Branson and Virgin brought.
Yeah.
And that was so that facility was just transformed, and so that was many people in the media and then around the world saw this mission control that happened to be a university inside. It was built inside this conference room.
Right. And if they want to learn more about that, as I traveled out of the Salina Airport, it's all photos and documentation where the baggage claim kind of is, correct? Down the hallway?
We have in the main lobby,
okay.
We have the storyline of the Global Flyer. And then at Fawcett Plaza, which is at the west end of Beechcraft Road, is the Fawcett Plaza, which is the monument and memorial to the Around the World flight.
I didn't know that. So where is that at again now?
At the west end of Beechcraft Road. So Beechcraft Road is on the north side of Salina Tech and on the south side of K-State Salina, off of Centennial Road.
And what will we find there? Is there actually a building, a museum?
Well, there is a monument there.
Okay.
And it's a globe. It's all made out of stainless steel. Has the Global Flyer traveling around the globe, and then there is the story of the Global Flyer at the base of the monument of the flight.
Nice. I'm going to see if we can try and do something different. So Matthew's our producer back there. He's listening. So I'm going to send Matthew on a mission to take a picture of that and insert that at the time we're talking about it, plus go out to the airport and kind of show everything that happens. But thank you for documenting that, because that is, I don't even know that I realized how big an event that was. There were tons of news
Right.
people that were here, a lot of people from the community that were out watching it. But again, if we don't document this stuff of what happened in Salina, and I can't think of anybody other than getting Sir Richard Branson or Steve Fawcett here himself who could tell me the things that actually, how that started. I mean, to know that you were the guy who picked up the phone call and to say the right things and to get them here, all of that, again, comes back to community leader.
Well,
I think you have no idea how much respect I have for you, because the stuff you're doing for our community is truly amazing. And all the meetings that you do. Brian Richardson even quoted you on one of our interviews, and he goes, I can remember Tim Rogers standing up in meeting and saying, I'm not talking about downtown anymore until the hotel is gone. And the hotel is now gone, and that's where the, help me out with the rec center, what do we call it?
yeah, it is the field house.
The field house, yeah. So that's where the field house sits now. Again, I'm talking to people who are listening 10 years from now. You know, like there was a hotel that was there at one time,
Right.
the Holiday Inn. Is that correct?
Well, it's a Hilton Inn, I believe.
Hilton Inn. Okay.
It was, yeah. So, but on that point, Brian gets the credit for making the step forward, because.
But again, but you plant the seed. Don't
Well,
take that away.
no,
Like
no,
it takes community leaders like you to plant the seed for entrepreneurs like Brian to move forward.
Yeah, but it is a deal, and it was a meeting. It was in the chamber conference room, and it was nothing was going to happen to downtown until the facility was acquired, and that someone who had Salina's best interest at heart, and Brian took that comment and he implemented that, and that is I point to people said nothing happens without Brian taking that step, and acquiring the old Hilton. So now we've got a insurance company, got a field house, we've got a corner there that immediately said, okay, we can transform the downtown.
Yeah.
So
it was a nice start from that. So
it was.
I think we've been here maybe over an hour, kind of talking. As time goes, when we're talking on that. So I would love to invite you back.
Yes.
I would love to invite back and have a total conversation about what is coming up currently,
right,
and what you see in the future of air travel for Salina, Kansas. I know, you talked about a Houston flight potentially, and you talked about all of these other things that are going to happen. With your permission, I'd love to we'll get you back in the schedule, and
Please
we'll do
do.
a part 2. We're going to go ahead and air part 1, but we'll air part 2 about where you see the future of that, how much longer you're going to be with us. Who's your predecessor? Who are you? Hopefully you have somebody coming up behind you, and we're going to talk about all of that stuff.
We can probably in a few weeks we can talk a little bit more about that, and there is some work there's some work being done as far as succession, and so that's coming up. But more importantly, I'd be excited to talk about the future of scheduled air service. We do have what's called our Aviation Innovation and for Aviation Maintenance Center, their AIM Center, coming up. We are doing, Todd will be doing some things that we don't see other communities doing. So we talk about needing aviation workers, mechanics at One Vision Aviation. We need more students enrolled at K-State Salina and aviation maintenance. We need more students at Salina Tech to go ahead and get involved with the Salina Tech paint program that leads to aircraft paint, for example. We need a means to bring veterans in to get them interested in aviation maintenance jobs here at Salina, Kansas. So we have a project the Airport Authority adopted. It has been funded by the Kansas Department of Commerce, and we are standing up the AIM Center, and it'll be the start line for individuals and various types of channels, pathways into that. Young, old, former military, current military, wanting to transition their skills to aviation maintenance jobs, aviation jobs right here in Salina, Kansas. It's a partnership, the Airport Authority, K-State Salina, Salina Area Technical College, Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. I mean, this is, again, the collaboration partnership.
Yeah.
We're going to have a start line for those and to find their way into apprenticeships programs, enroll at K-State or Salina Tech, take their military experience, get their civilian certification so they can go to work here in Salina, Kansas. And then love to come back and talk about the K-Area Center. It's going to be a center of immersive advanced simulation unlike anything that is in existence today. It's a California company is coming to Kansas, to Salina and the campus of K-State Salina. They're leaving California to have better opportunities to grow the business, and this has implications for advanced manufacturing, for Great Plains, Kubota, for Schwann's, for all of our manufacturers, for our aviation business. It'll be the most unique advanced simulation center in the country, and it has global implications as far as what the business it will bring to Kansas.
Wow.
There's a lot of fun things happening.
I'm ready for part 2. I think it's going to be great.
I think we're going to need part 3.
Part 3 too?
Yeah, I'm ready for part 3.
What a great community we live in, huh?
It is.
And you said it, with the partners, the influential people that are in town that we get to meet with in the community when we go to these meetings. Everybody's wanting the best for Salina. Right. And it's an amazing community. And with your vision and your help, I wanted to acknowledge you as a community leader. Thank you for coming on the show. And everybody who's watching, stay tuned for part 2. Tim Rogers, the Executive Director out at the Airport Authority. And I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.